learners, welcome to this session of Certificate in Fashion Design program, that is CFDE. Today's topic of discussion is fabric grain and basic hand stitches. This is an activity part of this program of course 2 of this program, which is titled as basics of pattern making and sewing. So this is activity 5 and 6. When you go through the study material, you will find it as an activity 5 and 6 of this course, and it is named as the fabric grain and basic hand stitches. So let us know what all points we will discuss in this session. So in this session we will discuss about the grain lines. What is grain line, what is its important in the pattern making, and why it is taken care while we going to construct a pattern. So what is grain line? We will discuss different types of grain line and its importance, and basic hand stitches. So what are base hand stitches, and what there are some basic hand stitches which you should know when you are going to create a pattern, and it is it is very useful in every part of when you design a garment, when you construct a garment. So first of all we will discuss the activity 5, which is based on working with fabric grain and straight, cross and bias grain. So why this activity is important, why you should practice this activity with fabric. You can take a fabric and you can practice, and you can know what type of the grains are there and why it is important when you construct a garment. So first of all you can identify the fabric grain line, how different grains and direction of the yarns are there. You can see it and you can just identify yourself which is which type of grain you are using for the construction of garment. Then you can understand and identify 3 grains, which is the straight grain line, cross grain line and bias grain line, and then you can select a suitable grain line for various garments. So when you come to know and understand that there are different grain lines, 3 straight grain, cross and bias, so according to that you can select which grain is suitable for your design and for the garment construction. So first we will discuss what grain is, as we have discussed it in earlier sessions also, that grain is the straight the direction in which the yarn is woven. So when we see a fabric, it is woven or it is interlaced, created by interlacing of 2 yarns. So when we interlace or weave the 2 yarns together, we get a fabric. So when 2 yarns are interlaced together, so there is direction also. So in the fabric we just get the straight direction, lengthwise direction and the crosswise direction. So what is the lengthwise grain or lengthwise direction? So the lengthwise direction or the grain of the fabric is also said as the warp. So generally we have the 2 yarns, warp yarn and the weft yarns. So lengthwise grain or lengthwise direction is said as the warp yarns. So yarn which is parallel to the selvage are known as the warp yarns, and the direction is known as the lengthwise grain. So when we see a fabric, when you after going through this video, you can just imagine and you can just identify yourself that when you see a fabric, you see 2 yarns, and the yarn which is parallel to the selvage or the edge of the fabric is said as the lengthwise grain, and this is the most of the garments are cut in this direction only. So when you cut the fabric for garment construction, most of the fabric is cut in the lengthwise direction. Then we have the crosswise grain, which we say as the weft direction of the fabric. So the yarn which is perpendicular to the selvage are known as the weft yarn, and the direction is known as the crosswise grain. So the garment cut in the direction will have more stretch and less strength as compared to the warp yarn. So we can say the garment which are constructed on the weft or the crosswise grain has more stretch in the garment, and they are less strength as compared to the lengthwise grain. So we got a conclusion that if we want the garment to be more strengthened, we use the lengthwise grain. So these are the two, lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain, and the third is the bias grain. Bias grain, it represents a slanting or a diagonal line across the weave of the cloth. Like in the picture you can say, if we have a square piece of fabric, when we stretch it from the center point which is slanting, or we stretch it at diagonally, it is said as the bias point, or the true bias point of the fabric, which is when we develop, it is at the 45 degree of the angle on the fabric. So a true bias is the angular line that is intersected with a lengthwise and crosswise grain at a 45 degree of angle. So this is the point of the fabric where it is the most stretchable point of the fabric. So we generally cut the fabric in the bias grain, true bias grain, when we want the fabric to be more stretchable, to be more circumference. We cut the fabric in this direction. This was about the grain line and the types of grain which we find and which we use while constructing a garment. So this was activity 5. Now we discuss the activity 6, which is based on basic hand stitches. So first of all, we will discuss what all tools and materials we need for making a basic hand stitches. When we go for creating a basic hand stitches, what tools and material we need to create. First of all, we need a needle, then we need a pin cushion, we need pin to hold the fabric when we go for the making stitches. We need thimble, which is a type of instrument like we wear in our finger to don't get it hurt by the needle. We use the different type of threads to create the stitches, and we need a fabric. So these are the basic tools we need to create a basic hand stitches. Then there is a word which we should know while we go for the stitching. So there are two terms we generally heard, like it is seam and stitches. So seam is a stitch, we called it. It is a loop of thread or yarn resulting from a single pass or a movement of thread needle in a sewing or a knitting. Like when we have a needle and we just insert the thread in the needle and we use it to make a loop on the fabric, it is said as the seam. And hand stitching or sewing, it is a stitching fabric together permanently by hand. So these are the two terms or the words we need to know while we go to the hand stitching. So there are some basic hand stitches what we will be discussing today. First is the back stitch, basting stitch, running stitch, outline, blanket stitch, cat stitch, and chain stitch. So these are the basic hand stitches which is very important for you to know, and these stitches we generally use in every type of designing. We use these types of stitches. So first we will discuss about the back stitch. So back stitch is said as the strongest hand stitch and is used to imitate the machine stitch. So generally when we do the stitching of the garment by machine, when you see the stitch on the fabric, it is not in a sequence, it is just overlapping. So when we create such type of stitch with hand, it is very similar to the machine stitch, and it is said as the back stitch. So to make a back stitch, what we have to do, as you can see in the picture, this is how back stitch is developed. What we do, we just take a needle, we insert a thread in the needle, then we make a knot at the end, as we generally do in any type of hand stitching. Then when you insert the first part of the needle, we can say when make a one running stitch, when you insert the needle in the fabric and make one running stitch on the fabric, then take a back stitch to the beginning of the first stitch and then do the overlapping in the same pattern you are doing. Like in the picture you can see, we have taken the needle, we inserted the thread, then you insert the needle into the fabric and just make one running stitch, and while interlacing and then overlapping the first running stitch what you have done, just creating the similar pattern in the same way we create the back stitch. So this is, there is no space left between two stitches, it is just very close enough and it is seems like it is overlapped stitch. So this is how back stitch is made, and this is the, we can say it is the strongest hand stitch we do to secure the fabric, two pieces of the fabric. Then the second is the basting stitch. So basting stitch we generally do when we are we have developed the pattern, we have cut the piece of fabric and we are going for the final stitching through the machine. So basting stitch is a quite important in successful sewing. So if we have two pieces of fabric and if we go directly for the machine stitching, we can just get the fabric not at the proper place. So to secure the fabric at the proper place and position, we secure it with the basting stitch. So this is used to hold the fabric temporarily. It is the temporary stitch in the place and until the permanent stitch is done. So we can say there are three types of basting stitch we generally have: the even basting, uneven basting and zigzag basting. So first in the picture you can say even, it is said that the stitches we have done on the fabric, it is very even, and uneven it is like we can have the small stitch or the long length of the stitch may vary. And it is very simple to do, like we have the thread and the needle and we just insert the needle and do like what we do for the running stitch. So this is how basting stitch is done. Then the third is the running stitch what we have. It is the most simplest needle work we do, which consists consisting of a line of small even stitches that run in and out throughout the cloth without overlapping. So in the basting what we did, it is like back stitch what we did one running stitch and another stitch it was used as the overlapping we did. So in the running stitch what we do not do the overlapping on the first stitch what we made. We just make a simple and even stitches on the fabric and it is said as the running stitch. To make this stitch, push point of the needle in and out of the fabric until you have several stitches in the needle. Then hold the fabric taut and with the left hand and pull the needle throughout. Until you practice, you can make it as a fine stitches. As you can see in the picture, this is how the running stitch it is done on the fabric. So this is one sample I have. You can see how the running stitch is done on the fabric. First stitch you can see, this is the even this is the how running stitch is done on the fabric by using your hand stitch method. Then the fourth is the outline or the stem stitch. So this is the similar to back stitch, but it is a little slanted. So make one slanted back stitch in front of another, letting each overlap the one it just a little bit until the design filled. As you can see in the picture, it is just like a back stitch we did, but back stitch what we did was in the straight line, but when we go for the stem stitch, it is little slanted, not in a straight position on the fabric. and just we by overlapping on the first stitch what we have done, we create a stem stitch, we can say. Then we have the blanket stitch. So it is also known as the buttonhole stitch. It is we generally use to make or put button or secure buttons on the garment. We use this blanket stitch. So buttonhole stitch used on the edge of the blanket or the material too thick to be hemmed. Like if we have the thick fabric and we want to stitch it or sew it by hand stitches, we use the blanket stitch, and it is used to secure the fabrics at the hemline. Then we have the catch stitch. It is also known as the herringbone stitch we have. So it is used for the flat finish next to fabric such as seam binding on a hem. And we hold open hem edge away from you, work from the left to right, then you can take a stitch in a hem, then a tiny stitch to the right just beyond edges of hem with the point of needle on the left. As in this picture you can see, we have just insert the thread in the fabric, and in this zigzag manner we create the herringbone stitch. Then we have the chain stitch we have done. If you have any time you have practiced the hand stitches or embroidery you have done, the first stitch you have done is the chain stitch. So it is said as the ornamental stitch in which loop are embroidered in a chain, and then we insert the needle in and out of the fabric like we did in the running stitch. Then we bring the thread under the tip of the needle and then insert in the fabric, then pull the thread out. So in this picture you can see we have the thread, needle with a thread. We just insert the needle in the fabric and make one running stitch, and then we make a loop above the thread, loop above the needle we have, and then when the loop is created, we just take out the needle from that loop and insert it in the fabric again. So this doing this in a continuous or a even manner, it creates a design like we have the chain we have created on the fabric. So this stitch, the chain stitch, we generally use for creating the ornamentation purpose on the garment, or if we want to create some design on the pattern. So this is how in the yellow part you can see this is how the chain stitch look like when we create. And this is the earlier we discussed about the herringbone stitch. It looked like this type of stitch on the garment. Then these were some basic hand stitches we generally use for creating garment. Then there are some points which you should remember when you go for the basic hand stitches. And what are they? First, choose the needle appropriate to the thread. So it is very important to know for which type of thread, for different type of thread we need different type of needles. So for doing the embroideries on the fabric, we need different type of needles and thread. And for doing just like running stitch we are doing the basting stitch, we need different types of thread and needle. So it is very important to know which type of needle and which type of thread is appropriate for your fabric or appropriate for according to the thread and the needle you have chosen. So fabric and the type of hand sewing stitch being is also important. Like which if we want to create a herringbone or the catch stitch, like you should know for which type of fabric catch stitch is very important, and why in which type of fabric you can do the catch stitch. And you can just identify the fabric, and according to that you can identify the stitch you want to create. Then the second, you can use a single thread no longer than 24 inches. Like when generally what we do, we take if we are going to do running stitch, we insert a thread, and the thread we take it is very long. So if you take so long or long thread, ends of thread, it is not convenient for you to do the stitching. So it is recommended that you should take not longer than 24 inches of thread at a time of stitching. Then keep the stitches loose to avoid puckering. Like if we are making hand stitches, it should not be too tight and it should not be too loose. Stitches should be like, if we make the stitches very tight, it will give puckering or wrinkles on the fabric. So avoid these too tight or the too loose stitches on the fabric. Then begin and end hand sewing tools with a tailor knot. Make a knot at the end of the thread very wisely, and use a pair of scissors when you want to cut the thread. For the cutting of the thread, use scissors and the cutting scissor only. So these are the very some important terms or points you should keep in your mind when you are going for the basic hand stitches. And if you keep these points in your mind and choose the thread and fabric very wisely, you can make a good stitches. So these are the basic hand stitches, and the process we discussed in brief how we can make. You can practice this by your own and you can just see how the stitches comes out. So this was about the activity 6. What today we in this session we discussed about the grain line. We discussed different grain lines, the straight grain, the cross grain, and the bias grain we use, and we discussed and what is its important and in which direction the fabric should be cut to create a good fitted garment. Then we explained different basic hand stitches, that we discussed some of the basic hand stitches which is used in garment construction, and we discussed also the steps and the method for construction of these basic hand stitches. Hope this session is beneficial for you. Thank you.